Without further ado, we will get Werner set up to do his Bonobo and the Atheist. Everybody welcome Werner. Thank you.
Me? Is that pretty good? Can you hear me? Yeah, all right, great. There we go, Bonobo and the Atheist. So, all right, how do I move forward? It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, isn't it? Animals will kill, steal, deceive, cheat, lie, anything they can to survive, because only the meanest, toughest son of a bitches out there are going to make it, and all the rest have been selected against and have been gone extinct, right? Humans are better. They have higher brain power, and they have compassion. They hold ethical standards. Well, okay. I'm not going to quibble here, all right? The Veneer theory of human nature tells us that, let's see, we're still pretty bad in the core, and we have this thin skin of morality which separates us from the animals. But once things get really tough and that skin gets pierced, we're just as bad. This was the theory, a biological theory that was being taught to Frans De Waal when he started studying apes in the latter part of the 1900s. But he began to question it. After all, Neanderthals had altruistic behavior. They have fossil evidence that they were nurtured people into adulthood with things like dwarfism and limb paralysis, people who couldn't really contribute to society, but had made it to adulthood, so obviously they had help from other people around them. And do we really believe that hunter-gatherers had no sense of social cohesiveness before religious texts were written a few thousand years ago? I mean, obviously, these kind of groups of people had to cooperate and work with each other. Do we really think they never cared about when someone died just because they hadn't read the Bible or some other religious text? Well, no. And then he began working with chimpanzees and noticed that chimpanzees, after a big fight, will actually come together and groom each other. And so he began to question this, and when we started working with bonobos, he found that even more empathy and cohesiveness in this group. What are bonobos? Well, they're the humans branched off from the gorillas earlier on, and then the bonobos and chimpanzees split off from the human line a little bit later. So we're related, more closely related to the chimpanzees and bonobos. They're less aggressive than chimpanzees. They're more empathic. They have a matriarchal society compared to a patriarchal society with the chimpanzees. And they use sex for conflict avoidance, and they use it for almost everything. They'll greet each other that way. If you have two groups of chimpanzees meeting each other for the first time, they'll fight, possibly even killing a few of them. Bonobos, they'll be cautious at first, and then within 15, 20 minutes, they'll start to make out with each other. And this is male and female, male on male, female, female, even adult and children, and it's just all over the place. So they'll do it, and it's usually very brief. I mean, maybe a few minutes or 30 seconds, but it's just a way of, well, I'm not going to get into your, okay. And then they'll part their ways, and they say they can tell they're having orgasms in some cases. So they're having fun. They're the hippies of the ape world. The bonobos have a body build that's much more like the Ardipithecus and humans compared to chimpanzees that are much stronger. So if we're related to apes and bonobos, but more closely to bonobos, he asked the question, does morality come Maybe we're more like bonobos than the apes and than the chimpanzees. So does morality come from without, or does it come from within? Maybe it's in us already from where we've come from and evolved from. So what is morality? In order to examine this more carefully, did a lot of experiments, but first we need to define what is morality. Do chimps and apes have morality? Well, some famous people talked about morality, saying, oops, outside of human desires, there's no moral standard. We all know morality is relative. John Figdor gave a talk recently, morality exists only as interpreted and viewed by people. And paraphrasing from Richard Dawkins' book, we don't get it from religion, but from the people around us, and it changes with the zeitgeist of the times. But these are all definitions of morality that talk about current state and perhaps evolution of it in the past few hundred or 1,000 years. Frans De Waal wants to add to this that morality must fit the species as it's meant for. So it goes back much further in time. Another definition of morality, there are many of them, but one is a set of social rules that are followed either because we feel empathy for others or fear group punishment if we break them. And it's characterized by these basic foundations: empathy, compassion, reciprocity and fairness, prosocial tendencies, and restraint and self-control. Another way to look at this is a pyramid like this, where empathy and fairness are the main building blocks of what we would define as morality. And then we have these other factors that sometimes play a role. So let's look at chimp bonobo society, and I use them interchangeably because in the book he goes back and forth with different examples, and so I don't remember exactly which ones are from which bonobos, and so anyway, the behavior is very similar actually in many cases, except for the differences I described earlier. They'll share food, they'll lick each other's wounds. There's consolation if someone gets into a fight. And of course, there are always fights. And bonobos get into fights just as much as chimp, maybe not as much. It's just they tend to resolve it in a different way, using sex instead of just grooming. Yeah, that's the next. Oh, let me go back. I think I'm skipping too far. Sorry. Now here's an example, and I didn't have an actual picture of what's going on here, but in this particular zoo, there's a group of female chimps that use this tool here to crack macadamia nuts, which their teeth aren't strong enough to crack them, so they need the rock to crack them. And I tried to draw in a line here showing that it's attached, and so only one chimp can use it at a time. The males are strong enough to crack the macadamia nuts, but the females aren't. The males actually have strong enough teeth that they can crack bone. But the females need to use this tool, and the alpha female will get, everyone gets a certain number of macadamia nuts, and then one by one, in hierarchical order, they go in line and they crack the macadamia nuts, and then they pass the tool on to the next one. So there's a nice social structure here that everyone follows, and boy, if someone tries to jump ahead, out of line, all hell breaks loose, and they hear about it. Similar story, a bunch of teenage, in another zoo, all the chimps had to come inside at the same time. Everyone had to be in before they got fed. Well, these two teenage chimps were hanging around. They liked the outdoors. They were sharing. They loved the island for themselves, and they were taking a long time to come in. And finally, they came in. Everyone got fed, and boy, the next day, the other chimps tore at them, and they just all hell broke loose. And the next day, those adolescents, the teenagers, they were the first to come in. So there's punishment for not following the rules. There's a whole structure. There's a whole society. There's a whole organization behind what's going on with these animals. Of course, there are going to be arguments and disputes. And here's the example, the alpha male mediating a dispute between these females over the food resource. And in the bonobo society where the females are more hierarchical, often they will be, or with chimps also, the females will mediate disputes between the males or others. So it can go either way. Chimp females have been known to band together in case of an overly aggressive male and get into a male and chase off a male who's raping one of the women. So even rape is known as something that's disallowed and fought against. So you have to follow the rules. You have to be part of that ethical, moral structure in that society. If they're after conflicts, there's grooming going on, and they repair because they want to keep that social structure organization in place so that the society doesn't break apart. Here's an example of long-term, one of the caretakers, long-term memory about right and wrong. One of the caretakers was feeding a chimp, and the chimp accidentally bit off one of her fingers. And he was shocked, and the next day she comes back and she holds up her hand, damaged hand, and the chimp runs away in the corner, cowering for all night in the corner, knowing that he had done wrong. Well, that lady was transferred to another zoo, did other things. 15 years later, she comes back, and she's giving a tour or walking around in the area, and this chimp recognizes her out of a crowd, comes running over to see her, and trying to look at her hand, and can remember what happened 15 years ago, and knows that he had done something wrong, and obviously he cares about her, right? 15 years later. So these are not animals that are just reacting on impulse and quickly doing whatever comes to mind and then forgetting about it, right? Restraint and conflict avoidance are another aspect of this. There's an example of some peanuts tossed between two baboons, and they both saw it, they both want it, but they both decide it's not worth the fight, right? So they're having a restraint. Two groups of monkeys were observed finding themselves in the same tree, fig tree or some kind of fruit tree, and then they realized they're both after the same resource, so they decided to just run away from each other, leave the tree alone in order to avoid the conflict. Young males will if there's a sexually available female in heat, young male chimps will groom the alpha male because they're not really allowed to do anything here, but they'll tease and groom and suck up to this alpha male, and if he likes the job they're doing on the grooming, then every now and then he lets one of them have their fun. But it shows obvious restraint, the ability to control their emotions and their desires, and it shows free will. That magic word. Amazing. Here's another example of what we would call more human type emotion. One of these chimps had died, or bonobos, and all the others, gather around and in silence, observing. And you can see just cases on this on the internet also, on YouTube of monkeys honoring their dead or watching over the dead for hours at a time. He does go into the thought of what animals actually think about in the afterlife, but that I think is pushing it a bit, and he didn't really go into that too much. So the next tests describe whether animals care about each other. Do they care in any measurable way? So here a test was done where these chimps can come in from outside into these cages, of their own free will. They come in, and because they know they may get rewarded. And this chimp here has a box of tokens, and the tokens are either red or green. And the red one, if he chooses the red one, only he gets a little treat. But if he chooses a green one, which is a prosocial choice token, this is the selfish token. If he chooses the green one, then they both get a treat. And so the question is, what will this chimp do? For him, it doesn't matter. He gets his treat no matter what. So here's some of the results. If there's no partner next to him, then about 45% of the time he'll choose this is the prosocial choice, so this is the number of times he chooses the green one. It's within error. It's about 50-50. So it doesn't really matter which he chooses, right? But now with this types of partner behavior, if the partner is there and the partner just sits there doing nothing, it goes way up to almost 60%. He starts picking the prosocial one. He sees the neighbor next to him. He says, okay, he deserves something too, so why not help him out? If the partner does some attention getting, sort of waving and say, hey, I'm here too, reminding him that, then the choice goes up to almost 70% of the prosocial, and they both get their treats. But if the partner starts pressuring him, spitting at him, shaking the cage and everything, then it goes back down. Because if you're not going to behave, you're not getting your treat today, right? So there's only a tendency here, and they've done these kind of studies with children too, and the numbers are a little bit higher, but so it's only a matter of degree whether how we differ from children versus animals versus the chimps. Here's another example, and I think Frans De Waal, I'll let him describe this one because he's much better at it than I am. Is it hooked up? Can we? Oops. What happened? I use the mouse. I need the sound though.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So I thought that was great. I just had to show that video. You'll notice that some people argued that this was not quite a fair test because the one guy gets grapes all the time, but they did some tests with chimps and found that some chimps will actually refuse the grapes unless the other chimp also, when they did it with chimps instead of capuchins, will actually refuse the grapes unless the other guy also gets a grape. So there's really a sense of fairness involved. So they really have that basic foundation of morality built into them, right? And that's just... Now, if you thought that this is just limited to apes and higher mammals, as you said, there have been done studies with dogs and birds, and here's an example of empathy and fairness in rats. This is a little cage here, a transparent cage, that can only be opened from the outside. And inside this one is another rat, and inside this one is a bunch of 5 chocolate chips. Now, these rats, on average, will sit down in one sitting, eat about 7 chocolate chips. So 5 is already a little bit too few. Okay, so this rat, he's got a choice. You know, he could just open this thing. He toys around with this for a while. He figures out how to open these things, and so he could just open this and eat all the chocolate chips for himself. It's not even enough for him, right? But what does he do? Almost invariably, he first opens this cage, lets his buddy out, then he'll go into this one. He's the only one who knows how to open it. Opens this one and eats on average 3.5 chocolate chips, which is about half of what he would normally eat, and leaves the rest for the other guy. So both empathy and fairness shown in rats. I thought that was pretty amazing. Even bats will do this. Some bats don't get a blood meal every night, and they're going hungry. So the ones that come back into the cave will regurgitate some of the blood, and share it with the people who are the people, I call them people that are hungry, right? So there's a prosocial reciprocity example here. Now, why? Yeah, that's exactly the reaction I was looking for. I wanted to examine whether there's really a biological. He mentioned some biological basis for this. And to show that this is really grounded in biology. So they did some studies with geese and measuring their heart rate. So geese have partners often for life. And so when they measured the heart rate of the partner, when his partner or her partner was in a conflict with the third goose, the heart rate of the non-conflicting, the one that was not in the fight, will actually go up. So there's a real biological connection between these two, showing empathy even in geese. In the 1990s, they discovered mirror neurons, and that's what's happening when you see this, right? Your own neurons fire. I mean, you've seen the picture of someone getting a shot. It's painful, right? You feel it, right? Yourself. There's this, and these are the mirror neurons firing in you, and these were then also discovered in apes and monkeys. Bonobos have spindle cell neurons, which were first thought to be only present in humans, and an enlarged amygdala, and both of these are centers that control your understanding and or empathy or ability to detect the emotion of others. We all know about things like smile contagion and yawn contagion. So we have this immediate reaction that allows us to feel how other people are feeling. If other people are sad, we feel sad. If other people are tired, we tend to feel tired. So this is also observed in animals. Another way we see a biological basis is in this example of rhesus monkeys, that the adolescent female rhesus monkeys just love to cuddle newborn babies. So when they see a mother with a newborn baby, they'll go up to it and groom that baby groom the mother until finally she'll release the baby and give it to the adolescent. And he says, De Waal said that they'll make bets on how long it takes for that adolescent to fall asleep, usually within 5 or 10 minutes, because the oxytocin release makes them so relaxed that they just so enjoy it so much that they'll fall asleep. So the point here is that doing good feels good for real biochemical reasons. It's not just sort of a sociological analysis or a psychological analysis. There are real biochemical things that we can measure that show how these emotions are really deeply embedded in our biochemistry, and they're not coming from the top down or from outside somewhere. Now let's look a little bit at animal altruism. For example, young bonobos. He described a story where there's an elderly bonobo, and every now and then she'd get thirsty. She'd have to walk over to the stream to get some water. The younger bonobos, females, would notice this. They'd jump out of the tree, run out, and they'd come back, fill their mouth with water, and spit it back into her mouth. Because they knew she was having trouble, or help her up into a tree where they're feeding, those kind of things. Another story was 2 female elephants, one blind, the other one became friends with her for life, and they kept together constantly. The one leading the other one to, the water sources or wherever there was food, whatever she needed to go. And as soon as they became separated, they would become frantic and always stay together, honk and horn and try to get together again. Another case of, at least 10 examples of male chimps caring for unrelated orphans in the wild. And of course, caring for children is one of the most altruistic things you can do because it takes so much energy and resources. I read recently this book called A Girl with No Name about Marina Chapman, who was raised by monkeys between ages of about 5 and 9 or 10, and she was orphaned and lost in the woods in the Colombian jungle, and she learned the monkey ways. And in this one example, she had eaten some poisonous berries. One of the elderly capuchins noticed this, that she was retching and in trouble. He leads her down to this muddy part of the stream and takes her face and pushes it down into the muddy water. And she's frantic and she, fearing that he's trying to kill her. Well, and he raises up her face. She says she could see in his eyes that he was being, empathic with her and not trying to kill her. So he pushes her head down again. She sucks up some of this dirty water. Pretty soon she vomits, getting rid of all the poison, or most of it. And then he waits around, then leads her over to a clean part of the stream, lets her rinse out her mouth, and leads her back to the group. So, this monkey knew a lot about what to do, what her problem was, how to fix it, and how to help her out. And this is obviously not the selfish gene at work here, because he has no, genetic interest in this lady, in this girl, right? Humpback whales helping gray whales save their children from a killer whale, and you can find many, many more examples on the internet. So there's something more going on than just our genes trying to propagate our genes. You've heard the joke about I would die for 2 brothers or 8 cousins, because that would propagate my equivalent number of genes as myself. There's something more going on here, and I guess the question is why? Why does evolution favor morality? Why would it even be useful? Well, of course, the main obvious reason is it in hunter-gatherer times or any animal times, it enhances your individual survival and your individual fitness, because you can survive much better in a group than you can alone. But then Robert Trivers has come up with the idea of reciprocal altruism, where you help someone and you scratch their back, they scratch your back, and you'll get some payback eventually. And you know if you're good buddies. Then there may be indirect payback from a third party who feels a tribal bond with you. So you may help some of these people over here, and then later on you're in trouble, and someone else sees that you're part of this group, and he saw that you were helping other people, then he might help you. So you may get indirect feedback or help. But the key thing that De Waal points out is that not all behaviors need this evolutionary selfish gene explanation. A lot of people talk about misfiring genes. They're doing this stuff. They shouldn't really be helping you. They shouldn't be doing this altruistic behavior because it's causing them to waste their resources on you, and they're not going to get anything back and not improve their own fitness. But he says, well, I have hands that I use, probably evolved to climb trees, but I don't need them for that anymore. I can play the piano, and that nobody would call playing the piano with my hands as misfiring or a mistake. So, or you can text or whatever you want to do with them now. So his theory more is that we're not bad at the core, but we're good at the core. And we have this ability to do state matching, which is what animals have. And as we go up the evolutionary chain, we have more and more complexity built into this ability to have empathy and social concern and cooperation. But it's just a matter of degree rather than coming from the externally or outside. So how does religion fit into all this? Well, he goes into this briefly. Religion and law simply codify sort of already existing moralistic tendencies. So religion has come in after the fact and written these things down. It's easy to get pulled into religion's teachings because we already have this biological predisposition to being moral. And we don't need a lot of convincing because we're already there. Any amount of preaching to us to make us behave would probably not work if we didn't already want to behave, right? And he suggests that atheists should not mock religion, but rather understand that it fills this need for security and authority and a desire to belong to a group. And therefore, my conclusion is that we need to do the same thing, just provided in using more rational stories and rituals. One final point that he makes, one theory that he comes up with is comes out of this following other set of tests, where they did an experiment where they have two groups of people, and one of them I can't remember the details, but they're given $10, and then they walk into another room where there's another person, and you give them the choice of, you can hand this guy, he's got nothing, give him as much as you want. And he gives them, typically they'll give you some amount, but if you do the same thing, and just before you go over there and do that, you read this paragraph, and that paragraph is about nothing in specific, but it contains these words like God and prophet and court and jury in there. Now people will give more, just by being reminded of these things. So there's a sense that if Big Brother is watching you, watch people are nice people. So whether it's a court or law or religion, it helps make people nicer. And so the theory here is that these big gods were invented when agriculture developed 10,000 or so years ago to allow the growth of large communities where not everybody knows each other. So if you're in a hunter-gatherer group of 30 to 100 people, pretty much everybody knows each other, and everyone's policing each other, and they're going to know about it if you've done something wrong. And so when the groups were large and you may have a conflict with someone that you don't know, then there was a need to develop a larger moralistic, I'm forgetting the term, but a larger God who will give you a reason to behave moralistically, because now this person, once you've had some bad interaction with him, you may not need to see him anymore. So you need some other rule or some way to control it. Anyway, to conclude, this has gotten all the way into Wikipedia, that this is already sort of accepted, that human morality, though sophisticated and complex relative to other animals, is essentially a natural phenomenon that evolved to restrict excessive individualism that could undermine the group's cohesion and thereby reducing the individual's fitness. Thank you.
You down for a couple questions?
Sure.
All right.
See what I can
Who
answer.
wants to stump Werner?
Yeah.
All right, Mark. I'm going to hold the microphone.
Yeah, this is very interesting, and it makes me wonder about things if you go beyond humanity. Like, for instance, the morality is sort of like an intrinsic formula of the universe, and that if you had space aliens on a planet on the other side of the universe, would they have similar morals? Or one of the reasons for us figuring out what morals are is at some point we're going to have to teach robots what morality is. And if we're going to teach robots what morality is, what algorithms do we use to generate those moral behaviors?
Robots.
So what's the question? I'm not quite sure what the question is.
You know, is it there's a scientific formula for morality?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the point is that it depends on the species. It depends on the culture. So there is no absolute morality, in my view. There's no way to define that. It depends on the situation you're in.
Well, maybe there is. We haven't discovered it yet. That's something atheists should do.
I suppose.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Mitch.
Go ahead.
First, I want to say there's been a couple talks here early on that were about morality. And I liked yours way better because of the biological perspective. And they didn't have that, and they were trying to do it at the sort of human level.
Thank you.
Which
yeah.
misses, I think, a lot of what you were talking about, which is very important.
Yeah.
Towards the end of your talk, you made this point about the religion fits into the morality, and the idea that because communities got larger, if I understand it correctly, was the need for invoking sort of the religious God business. But, the sort of beyond the hunter-gatherers, we're talking maybe 5 to 10,000 years ago. And my understanding is religion existed, 40,000 years ago. So I guess the question is, what was going on from 40,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, where they had religious kinds of behaviors? Was that not? What am I trying to say?
Yeah,
here?
I think I understand your question. The point De Waal makes is that not that there wasn't any religion back then, but that it was more. I mean, maybe they worshipped spirits or a rain god, or these kind of things, or thunder. And they still had rituals of burying their dead and those kind of things, but they didn't need the big gods that controlled everything and everybody. They needed that was the concept that so he talked about big gods, the ones that created the universe and control everyone and define whether you're going to heaven or hell, because you needed that kind of rule or fear in order to control your emotions. Okay.
Kind of going off that
Yeah.
comment, something I thought of immediately when I saw the watched people are good people. That may be true in a lot of churches and places where they feel like they need that. But in the growing secular society, do you feel like we're kind of moving past that need where we understand where morality is coming from and therefore we can embrace it as it is?
I don't think so.
Think people still are going to need church?
That doesn't mean we need church, but we need the sense that we're being watched. I mean, you know,
More by like each other.
I'll go steal a candy bar every now and then if I found that, you know. But if I have the sense that someone will, I don't know, you know, but you get the point. I think that it's still there, and that we still need to be watched slightly. We don't need a religious watch over us, but it's always easier to stray from what you know internally is right and wrong. So there's a chance. Yeah.
Yeah. Anonymity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Nobody
one
can
here?
see you. Yeah. Nobody can watch you.
It seems to me that, based on your presentation, that the underlying rule or principle behind the whole thing is what we would call the golden rule.
Mm-hmm.
That is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And maybe that's a result of the mirror neurons that you referred to, because it allows you to project yourself into the other person, or in this case, the other animal, trying to understand their position relative to you. Would you agree with that?
I would say basically that's probably right, but De Waal actually goes into that a little bit, and he says it's more complicated than that. For example, if I'm in a hotel and I meet some lady in the bar, and I follow her up to her room and break into her room, that's what I would want her to do to me, but she wouldn't want me to do that to her. So is that golden rule really universal like that? Right? So it's a little more difficult than that. Oh, wait. That was his example, not my example now.
So one thing that should also be clear is that not everybody's the same. Morality is a spectrum.
Right.
So
Right.
It's as though, isn't it, that we need the big religions, the laws, the other things, to kind of keep the outliers in line, the ones who don't have that innate moral sensibility, right?
Yeah, sure.
No.
Okay. Is that a question? Yeah. Right.
Hang on.
So excuse me, the word that comes to mind to me is community. And so whether you're talking about religion or the atheist community or any group of people, when you have people who rely on each other and have responsibility to each other, care for each other, then there's that cooperation, more of that cooperation. And it's my observation that as people do become more anonymous and move away from living in close-knit communities, there are more people who are, you could call them lost or separate or outliers, but who don't identify with a specific community. And there isn't that, that sort of that net, that safety net, that whatever you want to call it, that keeps people together and keeps people either accountable or just feeling like they belong and have some sense of being part of that greater whole.
Right. I mean, he does mention that morality, there's in-group morality and out-of-group morality. And so how you treat people outside of your group is often different than what you treat people inside your group. And, if they're threatening you, you can kill them or whatever you need to do to maintain your in-group morality. It's okay. And so, yeah, I agree with you, but that's what I think secular laws are for. We have our government that does that. It doesn't create that sense of community, and so we need to generate that in a different way. But we have the laws to keep us moral, I think, yeah.
Are we going to do one more question with Scott, and then you guys feel free to to ask Werner more questions after we finish here.
I realize that this is not your book, you're just reporting it, so you may not be able to answer this, but I've heard some people claim that the differences between bonobos and chimps are being kind of overhyped. I mean, after all, bonobos are more closely related to chimps than they are to humans.
Right.
Do you have a feeling for that yourself, or?
No, I agree. I mean, and he points that out in the book too. That you don't. He says, don't get me wrong. I mean, bonobos get into fights. They will rarely kill each other. Very rare. It's almost never been reported. But they'll still have the conflicts and the fights, and they're still fairly dangerous. So yes, I agree that they've probably been overhyped just because. No, right.
All right, let's give Werner another round of applause. Thank you, Werner.
Okay. Thank you.